Hi, this is the voice, Michael Chavello. You're listening to the Premium Oddscast, hosted by leading MMA odds maker Nick Kalikas, fight scientist and author of Fightnomics Reed Kuhn, and MMA journalist Brian Hemminger. The absolute best UFC betting info, picks, statistics, and analysis from the most respected authority in mixed martial arts betting, MMAOddsBreaker.com.
Welcome to the Premium Oddscast, presented by 5 Dimes. I'm Brian Hemminger, joined today by leading mixed martial arts odds maker Nick Kalikas to break down this Saturday's UFC Fight Night 51 event, which takes place in Brasilia, Brazil. If you're unfamiliar with our format, myself and Nick will be breaking down the fight card from top to bottom, providing extensive analysis and a pick for each fight after doing our film study for the event. Then, fight scientist Reed Kuhn will step in and offer his expansive numerical insight on all bouts with sufficient data. Today, Reed will be able to contribute on 4 total bouts. Now also pay attention to our MMAOddsBreaker staff picks article, because if we make any changes to our picks from the show, we will post them there following the weigh-ins. Now briefly looking back at the last event, our premium package bets for UFC Fight Night 50 went 1-2 to lose 1.8 units. We won our underdog play on Matt Mitrione, but we failed to cash on both of our underdog plays on Sean Soriano and Gegard Mousasi. We also lost a free bet on Michael Chiesa. Back to the present, UFC Fight Night 51 features an 11-fight card in total and will be aired on a combination of UFC Fight Pass and Fox Sports 1 this Saturday night. Let's dive right in. Now, kicking off the UFC Fight Night 51 preliminary card on UFC Fight Pass, we have a bantamweight contest between Ronnie Yahya, who is 19-8 with 1 no contest, taking on Johnny Bedford in a rematch, who is 19-12-1 with 1 no contest. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how's the public shifted things so far?
I opened at Bedford minus 125 to come back on Yahya minus 115. And right now, I should mention that all the lines are going to be courtesy of 5dimes.eu, and these are all hot off the press, so all fresh lines at the time of the recording. So some early action coming in, and right now, Bedford is a minus 170. The comeback on Yahya is plus 130. Lines will tighten up, and I'm expecting to see the line drop. There is overall public support, I think, on Yahya over Bedford a little bit, despite their last fight and the way it kind of was playing out early on. But it did look like Bedford had a significant enough edge to keep the fight upright. And then, of course, he's got a big striking advantage, in my opinion, and I'm sure most of you guys out there as well, on the feet over Yahya. So it's an interesting fight. It's the type of fight that Bedford should win more times than not, but if he does tend to make that mistake, I mean, it's your typical striker versus grappler matchup. Even though Bedford has some wrestling, has some grappling in his own right, he doesn't have the grappling level obviously Yahya does. I mean, Yahya has some solid wrestling overall, and he's just a BJJ whiz. We all know that. So he's more than capable of finishing most on the ground. So it really all depends on Bedford. If he could keep the fight standing, he should do enough damage on the feet where he could possibly finish Yahya. Yahya's been finished twice before in his career by knockout. If he doesn't finish him, then he should clearly outpoint Yahya on the feet as well. So I think it is Bedford's fight to win or lose, and I am going to lean Bedford's way.
Yeah, this fight's all going to come down to the ground game, because while Bedford does not have the best defense on the feet, he's been knocked out once on The Ultimate Fighter and once in the UFC. There's no way Ronnie Yahya knocks him out. He just does not have that type of striking power. He really isn't much of a striker at all. He is a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu champion that transitioned to MMA, and he's pretty much stuck to what works, and that's the ground game. The problem here is Yahya does not have the best takedowns. He really needs to close the distance and get inside and try to get a trip or something. He's not going to be shooting in and getting a double leg on Johnny Bedford. Bedford is just too big. He's about 4 inches taller, and he's got a much larger reach advantage, and he's going to have to try to get inside to take Bedford down if he wants to win. And I'm not sure he'll be able to do it. They fought earlier. Bedford got the headbutt knockout, and then it was turned into a no contest. But Bedford had stuff to take down already. Yahya had shot in from way too far away, so I can see that type of process repeating over and over. It was a small sample size, but that could definitely be the story of this fight, is Yahya not being able to get inside due to Bedford's length, and then Bedford just picking him apart with some long jabs and straight rights, and eventually Bedford's either going to probably win a decision or get a knockout. Now, the only thing to be worried about is if Bedford gets taken down, if he slips, if anything happens where he finds himself on his back, Yahya could absolutely submit him. Bedford has terrible takedown defense, but or terrible submission defense. His takedown defense is okay. But if that happens, Bedford's in trouble. But I don't think it happens, and my pick is going to be Johnny Bedford. Now, Reed, what do the numbers tell us for this one?
Well, I'm in agreement with you guys. I think Yaya's only chance is to get close, get this to the ground, and go for submissions. But the problem is Johnny Bedford, as you said, he does have good takedown defense. It's when he gets put down, he has some trouble defending the submissions. But his takedown defense is good. It's at 70%, which is well above average. And he also does have a range advantage. So being the longer fighter, knowing that Yaya is kind of one-dimensional, he's limited in his arsenal, he's going to be going for takedowns, Bedford should be able to know that those takedowns are coming and defend them. And we started to see it in their first fight. Granted, it ended very early. But Yaya's striking accuracy is not good. He's not ever won a knockout. I think all of his, or most of his wins come by submission. So when it comes to the striking game, Bedford has a huge advantage, and it's even more of an advantage because he knows that Yaya doesn't want to be there. So there's some questions about can Bedford do that for 3 rounds? Can he keep up that pace? Can he keep defending and mount an attack simultaneously? Those are more nuanced, but just overall on the stat line, we do see strong advantages for striking in Bedford. And we do see enough, at least, of some defensive grappling for Bedford to hopefully stave off the attack if he doesn't want to get submitted. So I think Bedford is the pick, although keep in mind the only angle for a victory here for Yaya is probably a submission or one of those situations where he gets back control and he just hangs on long enough to win a round, and he does it for more than one round. We saw that with Huissier Formiga and Zach McCoskey recently. You get a grappler on your back, they're hard to get off. So that could be one way that Yaya pulls out a decision, but I also think there's some ingredients here for an early finish, which could be an interesting angle. So far I do agree with the lines.
All right, excellent. Thanks, Reed. Now moving on to the welterweight division, we have longtime veteran Paulo Thiago, who is 15-7 overall, taking on Sean Spencer, who is 11-3. Now, Nick, what's the MMA odds maker's perspective on this one?
I opened Spencer minus 150, the comeback on Thiago plus 110. Tricky line to set. I mean, Thiago is an outstanding fighter. He's been obviously around the welterweight division for a long time, has accomplished a lot, but there is a bit of a decline there. So will the public believe in the decline or not? And so far, they do believe in it. And the line's actually escalated a little bit. It's not much, but Spencer's now minus 165. The comeback on Thiago's plus 125. So I understand the reasoning behind the movement because I do think that Spencer, more times than not, should win this fight, especially at this point in their career, where you got the guy that will sprawl and brawl, keep it on the feet, and Spencer against the probably more well-rounded fighter in Thiago, because Thiago's not that bad on the feet. He's got decent wrestling, and of course he's got a big submission advantage on the ground too, but will Thiago be able to get the fight to the floor? I think Spencer's takedown defense is good enough. So if it does stay standing, I think Spencer's going to be quicker. He's going to be a little bit more precise with the striking, and he's going to be able to land those shots that will win him at least the points battle along the way. If not, maybe even finish Thiago. I mean, Thiago, again, another spot where he's been knocked out a couple times throughout his career. So I wouldn't be shocked to see Spencer finish him along the way, but at the same time, Spencer has to be cautious because his kryptonite throughout his career, he's also lost by his submission twice, and Thiago is a pretty talented guy on the ground, as I just mentioned. So it's, again, kind of your typical grappler versus striker matchup. But I think that the age difference here, I mean, Spencer's 27 where Thiago's 33, but Thiago is actually beyond 33 years old, in my opinion. I think he's much older in MMA years, and I think that Spencer has looked good. He keeps on improving his overall game. So again, it's another spot where it's kind of his fight to win or lose. If he doesn't make many mistakes, I think you should be able to at least outpoint Thiago. So I got to lean Spencer here.
And I'm in agreement. The main reason I'm going to go with Sean Spencer is it's just more of a fade Paulo Thiago situation. You talked about how he's older than he looks. It's true. I mean, he showed up in his last fight all great and he was slow and he got picked apart. And he just did not look like the Paulo Thiago of old, that one that came into the UFC and looked amazing with those finishes of Josh Koscheck and Mike Swick. That Paulo Thiago's gone. In its place is kind of a shell of the former Paulo Thiago. He doesn't have the speed. He doesn't have that explosiveness. He really doesn't have much on the feet. And it's kind of sad because, he was a really exciting fighter at one point, but this isn't a thing where I'm not even sure why the UFC kept him around after his last fight. He offered absolutely nothing, And against Sean Spencer, unless Paulo Thiago takes this fight to the ground, I just see him getting picked apart on the feet. Sean Spencer, thankfully, is not a huge knockout threat, so hopefully the last memory of Paulo Thiago in the UFC isn't one of him conscious. But I can absolutely see Sean Spencer outworking him on the feet. Spencer is a pretty solid striker. He has good footwork. He has a decent pace. He just doesn't have a lot of power. So I can just see a lot of punches, a high volume, and just outworking Paulo Thiago, making Paulo Thiago look even older than he is, and getting a decision. Because unless Paulo Thiago can take Spencer down, like how Spencer ended up losing his UFC debut, then I'm not quite sure how Paulo Thiago can win this fight. He just doesn't have that speed to hang with Spencer, and he's just taken a lot of damage and really has not looked good at all over the last few years. So my pick is going to be Sean Spencer. Now, Reed, what do the numbers tell us for this one?
Well, they support that conclusion. I think it's somewhat close because Paulo Thiago is very dangerous. We've talked about how he's kind of fading, but keep in mind his knockdown rate is actually quite high. He's dropped a lot of people in his UFC career. Whereas Sean Spencer, he's done it mainly by accuracy and pace. He's just out-hustled people. Now, he really focuses on striking. Sean Spencer has yet to attempt a takedown. And so he's obviously going to want to keep this standing. He doesn't want to mess around with Paulo Thiago on the ground. Thiago should have the advantages in the submission game. But Sean Spencer should be able to keep range. He's got decent, slightly above average takedown defense. I see it as very even here. If Sean Spencer is standing and striking and Paulo Thiago hasn't necessarily shown the best fight IQ in the past, he might get into that game. He might get sucked into that game. And just pace alone, Paulo Thiago tends to get outworked. He averages a low pace of striking. It's actually well below average. Sean Spencer tends to outwork people. He throws 40% more volume than his opponents. He maintains 18 strikes per minute while standing. That's attempts, which is way above average. So there's a serious volume mismatch here. Not to mention the age gap, and as Nick pointed out, Paulo Thiago is probably older than pushing 34 in fight years or MMA years. So there's a number of advantages that do lean Sean Spencer. There's just this big glaring hole in his ground game that we don't know about, where that could be an issue against a grizzled veteran like Paulo Thiago. He would know what to do if those openings present themselves. So there are some counterpoints here, but generally speaking, yeah, there are some advantages that are piling up in Sean Spencer's favor.
Now dropping down to the lightweight division, we have Francisco Trinaldo, who is 14-4, taking on Leandro Silva, who is 11-1-1 overall. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how's the public shifted things so far?
Well, up in Trinaldo, minus 190, the comeback on Silva, plus 150. And right now, at the time of the recording, just a little bit of movement. It's just dropped 5 cents. Trinaldo's minus 185, the comeback on Silva, plus 145. So some two-way action, back and forth a little bit, lines kind of holding steady. It's kind of a tricky fight. I mean, Trinaldo, in my opinion, has several advantages in this fight. One being, I think he's the better striker on the feet. He's a more active striker, more powerful striker on the feet. I think he's got the better overall wrestling game. He's got, I think, maybe not quite the submission game that Silva does, but he's definitely more than capable of landing a sub and hit subs as well. But the problem is he is getting up there a little bit in age. He's 36 years old now. Silva's a little bit younger, a little fresher. He's been, I guess I should transfer over to Silva real quick and give you guys a little background. Silva, he's a pretty solid fighter. He went on a 5-fight win streak. He was in the UFC before he made his UFC debut, of course, against Alcantara at a higher weight class. He ended up losing by decision and got cut. Now, before that, though, he was also on The Ultimate Fighter, I believe season 2 for Brazil, and he ended up losing the opening round fight by decision on that show as well. So, to me, Silva's more of a grappling-based fighter, even though he's got some skill on the feet and he does like to stand and bang a little bit. I think he's better on the ground a little bit, more so than he is on the feet. At least he's a little bit more active on the ground. But the problem is his wrestling's not really that good. His takedowns aren't that good. He does look for takedowns and looks to take the fight to the floor, but he does struggle against guys with decent takedown defense. And even though Trinaldo lost his last fight to Kessa by getting put on his back, overall he does have pretty solid takedown defense. So I think Silva, if he can't get the fight to the ground, he ends up letting the other fighter that he's fighting dictate the pace of the fight. Trinaldo, again, is a beast. He's going to be pushing the pace a little bit. And Silva likes to kind of use angles on the feet backpedal and counter strike opponents as well. And he is successful, no doubt about it. And when he does that, he just doesn't have a whole lot of power when he does that. I think the best attribute in Silva's striking game is definitely his kicks. I mean, the guy can throw a nice high kick. He can throw a nice spinning attack with his kicks. He's just more comfortable and more fluent, I think, with his legs than he is with his feet. But he seems to be improving. Again, he's on a 5-fight win streak. He is coming into this fight at 155, fighting Trinaldo, which seems to be on a bit of a decline. But that being said, with Trinaldo, I mean, you got to look at his conditioning is actually seems like it's been better the last few fights. I mean, that was a pretty hard fight against Chiesa, and he managed to not get put away and hang in there. And then, in his other recent fights, you could tell the progress, and his cardio is actually improving. So even though Trinaldo is getting a little bit older, I still think this is probably the best shape that he's ever been in his whole life. So that's a positive note for Trinaldo, and he is, from top to bottom, in my opinion, the overall better fighter. I think he is the more effective fighter again on the feet, and I think his wrestling's a little bit better too. So I think it's Trinaldo's fight to win or lose. But he is coming in and facing a younger, fresher fighter that has a point to prove that he belongs in the UFC, and I think that we're going to probably see the best Silva that we've seen thus far throughout his career. But I still give the edge to Trinaldo, and I think he's going to get the job done here.
And I'm in relative agreement, although I think this is going to be a little bit easier for Trinaldo than you're expecting, mainly because I just think Trinaldo's a little bit better everywhere. He's going to be the stronger fighter. He's going to be a little bit more powerful on the feet, a little more dangerous on the feet, and I think he has better wrestling and submission ability on the ground. He's definitely better from top position. Silva on the ground, while he does have quite a few submissions on his record, the main problem for him is, he's been pulling those off on the regional circuit in Brazil, and every time that he stepped up and fought somebody that was UFC caliber, you really don't see that submission game. So I really don't expect him to be pulling off a lot of submissions or attempts or anything. He's been much more defensive with his grappling in his bouts on the Ultimate Fighter or in the UFC. Now, I will give him a little bit of credit. His UFC debut was on short notice, up a weight class, against a guy that was significantly bigger than him in Ildemar Alcantara, and he just couldn't get anything going. So, that is a little skewed our perception of him. But again, he's taking this fight on short notice. Granted, he's won 5 fights since his last UFC performance. It's been a little bit more than a year. And, he looked okay in those fights, but this is a whole different animal. Now, Trinaldo, he has a lot of power on the feet. He's not the fastest guy. He doesn't have the best conditioning, but it is improving. But I am expecting Trinaldo to control the pace on the feet, and if the fight goes to the ground, Trinaldo should be the guy in control on the ground as well. Silva, when he's standing, he uses pretty good footwork and movement, but he's just too inactive. That's always been his biggest problem. He kind of stays on the outside and just doesn't throw enough strikes to really make an impact with the judges. And he doesn't really throw with enough power to make an impact. And Trinaldo's a guy that, against guys with big power on the feet, he could get himself in trouble, but I don't think that Silva really has that ability to do it. So unless Trinaldo completely gasses in the second or third round, which he has done before, then I really see Trinaldo controlling this fight and either getting a stoppage or winning a decision. So my pick is going to be Francisco Trinaldo. Now, moving on to the welterweight division, we have Igor Araujo, who is 25-6 with 1 no contest, taking on George Sullivan, who is 15-3 with 1 no contest. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
I opened Araujo minus 165 to come back on Sullivan plus 125. A little bit of movement coming in Sullivan's way early on. I wasn't really expecting it too much. It seems like Sullivan doesn't get much respect, but early on, for those of you guys that went out there and took the plus money on Sullivan, I do understand why. So I'm kind of impressed here because I'm going to actually pick Sullivan to win this fight straight out as well. I know Araujo is very talented, maybe underrated in his own right in several ways, but man, Sullivan's the type of fighter that is very difficult to fight against. I mean, the kind of style that he puts on his opponents. I mean, he's tough to get rid of. He's tough to take down. He always will push forward and push a grueling type of pace. He's pretty powerful with his stand-up, even though he's not the most technical stand-up striker. I mean, he's effective in the way he goes about his striking. So Sullivan had a pretty close but competitive and impressive performance against Mike Rhodes in his debut. And a lot of people were counting him out in that fight as well. Now, Raja, on the other hand, I mean, he's looked pretty good. He's been training at Jackson's camp, and he's done nothing but improve his overall game. His best attribute by far is taking the fight to the ground, controlling people, working a submission game. And I think that's what he's going to look to do here. And he's going to probably have the advantage if it does hit the floor, for sure, no doubt, especially with pure jiu-jitsu. Raja can definitely sub a fighter like Sullivan. But the problem is, and the reason why I'm picking Sullivan is I think Raja is going to have a tough time getting Sullivan to the floor. And Sullivan's the type of guy, when you do get him to the floor, he usually bounces up pretty quick. And he's hard to kind of control and dictate, as the fight goes on. He's hard to control. So I think Sullivan will probably stuff the takedowns. He'll look to sprawl and brawl a little bit. He'll look to push forward, and he's gonna, Arajo's cardio is not that bad, but still, I think it's gonna be a grueling type of fight that Sullivan's kind of used to those type of battles. And I think Sullivan's gonna edge out the decision here. Again, if he doesn't get submitted, I think Arajo's best chance of winning this fight, to be honest with you, is by submission. If, he doesn't catch Sullivan by submission, I think Sullivan's gonna win the fight. Now, it is kind of hard and difficult to stop Arajo, but Sullivan has enough power for sure that I wouldn't be shocked if, he does finish late in this fight, but more times than not, I think he probably grinds out a decision. So respect Sullivan out there, because he definitely is a tough guy, no easy out at all. And, again, for those of you guys that are coming in early on, I'm impressed, and, that's the way I'm going as well. Now, the line is, again, relatively early, and I'm sure we'll see some movement back and forth on this fight, and I expect Raja probably to, be the slight favorite again. So you guys might see some plus money out there on Sullivan, and there might be some value if that's the case. But I'm going to go on a limb and pick Sullivan here as well.
And I'm going to agree with you. Looking at this initially, I thought that Sullivan was a decent underdog to bet on, but now that the fight's even, it's a lot trickier. But overall, the way these guys match up, Araujo doesn't offer a whole lot on the feet. Most of his danger is in controlling position in the clinch and then getting top position on the ground. He's a pretty solid overall ground fighter, has some decent submission ability, and overall his top position control is pretty solid as well. That's basically how he won his first 2 UFC bouts. Sullivan, in his UFC debut against Mike Rhodes, he actually came in as an underdog, just pressured Rhodes, made him uncomfortable, and pushed the pace. He landed a decent amount of strikes per minute, just outworked Rhodes, and won the decision. He just did his job. It wasn't the prettiest performance, but it was efficient. Now, this time against Araujo, he's going to need to do the exact same thing, except there's going to be the threat of the ground. Sullivan, while he has decent takedown defense and does get up, he has had a little bit of trouble in the past against, really good ground fighters. The big question here is Araujo a good enough ground fighter to beat George Sullivan? And I'm not quite convinced. I think Araujo he's more of a situational ground fighter. Against guys like Ildemar Alcantara and Danny Mitchell, those guys wanted to go to the ground. Those guys didn't mind fighting off of their back. And Sullivan's not going to want to go there at all. So I think it's going to be a lot more difficult for Araujo to take this fight to the ground and get on top. So I really see Sullivan outworking Araujo on the feet. And as long as he can control the distance and control the pace and force Araujo to fight defensively, then he should be in relatively good shape. Now, if Araujo gets on top, this is a whole different ball game, but, Sullivan isn't exactly a fish out of the water on the ground either, so he potentially could be able to get back up and get right back to work. So it all depends on how this fight plays out, is whoever dictates the pace and whoever is able to implement their game plan. And we all know that Araujo wants this to the ground, and Sullivan probably just wants to keep this to the feet where he can do his thing. So I think Sullivan does enough in at least 2 rounds to win a decision. I really don't see either guy finishing this fight, so my pick is going to be George Sullivan. Now, dropping down to the featherweight division, we have Godofredo Pepe, who is 11-3, taking on Deshaun Johnson, who is 9-1. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how's the public shifted things so far?
Pepe opens -175, the comeback on Johnson +135. And it looks like early on, the public supporting Johnson. He's dropped to even money, and Pepe now is -140, so slightly lean towards Pepe. Not a surprise, again, because Pepe kind of gets disrespected more times than not overall. But hey, gotta give him credit. Pepe looked tremendous in this fight against Lahat last time out. And of course, Pepe's best attribute and best feature is definitely his ground game. The guy has pretty good submission skills, especially if he's got the advantage on the ground and, he's got that slight or significant edge over the opponent. If the opponent's not a grappler, I should say, he's going to definitely have a big advantage in most cases. Now, Johnson, he's got that pro boxing background, but he's about a 500 fighter, if I'm not mistaken. So he doesn't have a lot of success in the boxing realm, and he's also a former collegiate wrestler. So he's got some makings to be a solid fighter. I mean, he ran into a stud in Matthews in his debut, so you can't really fault him too much for that. I think Matthews is going to be something special possibly in the UFC. He's so young still, but so it's a respectable loss by Johnson, but that's by far the best competition he's ever faced was Matthews. Now Pepe, on the other hand, he's been through the Ultimate Fighter before. He's faced solid competition along the way, so Pepe's a little bit more game, a little bit more ready, I think, and a little bit farther ahead in his career as far as skill set goes than Johnson. So this is, again, probably going to be the second best fighter Johnson's ever faced. So that says a lot here. And I think Pepe is getting a little bit more confident. He's starting to throw some heavy leather on the feet. That could cost him because his aggression could lead to bad defense, which Pepe does have a little bit of a questionable chin. Of course, he's been clipped and knocked out twice on the ground, actually. So that's a little bit scary and a concern. And Johnson does have that boxing background. So, definitely, this is a good fight. It should be a fun fight while it lasts. I don't expect it to hit the cards. I think somebody is probably going to get finished here. Either Pepe is going to get knocked out or he's going to find a way to submit Johnson as well. So I think there's going to be finish either way, but I'm going to slightly lean towards Pepe because I think, again, skill set, he's just a little bit farther ahead of Johnson. He's fought better fighters than Johnson. And if Johnson takes this fight to the ground, he's not going to have an advantage over Pepe, and that's, might be what he wants to do here. If he stays on the feet, Pepe is going to be a little bit longer than him, and I think Pepe's aggression is going to be the difference here as well, because he mixes things up a little bit better than Johnson. But it should be a barn burner, and it's hard to trust either one of these guys, to be honest with you, as far as betting goes. But I am going to slightly lean towards Pepe. I think he is a star in Brazil. The Brazilian crowd loves him, supports him, and I think there's a bigger upside than most of us think and realize in Brazil for Pepe. So I'm on Pepe's bandwagon for this fight.
And once again, I'm agreeing. I really think that what's going to come down to this fight is the overall well-roundedness of Pepe. Johnson does have that boxing background. He's going to be dangerous in terms of punching power on the feet, but I really don't think Johnson offers enough in the kicking department. So Pepe, he has pretty solid kicks and knees. He should be able to hold his own from distance. And I think on the ground, Pepe absolutely is going to be the better fighter. It's just all going to be about whether or not Johnson is able to avoid the ground game, because pretty much Johnson's going to have a puncher's chance here to knock Pepe out on the feet. If this fight goes to the ground, even if Pepe's on bottom, I see Pepe sweeping him. He's got that really nice Kimura sweep. He's got a pretty solid overall ground game. He could probably submit Johnson, and he could also just ride out top position and land some strikes. Pepe's very popular in Brazil. I highly doubt that they want him to go out there and get knocked out again in Brazil. So I think what's going to end up happening here is Pepe will probably land some kicks early. They'll clinch. Maybe Pepe gets a trip takedown or something, and then he's just going to start chaining submissions together because that's what he does best. So Johnson, while he does have some power on the feet, we all know about his history before the UFC. He was pretty much a 500 boxer. Before the UFC, he fought complete nobodies and was able to get a lot of easy wins. And he definitely got exposed a little bit in his UFC debut. He did not have amazing takedown defense. He did not have great submission defense. He just got outworked. And I think Pepe is a step up even from the Jake Matthews kid he fought, even though he's dropping down a weight class. So Pepe should be able to beat him just about everywhere except pure boxing ability. And I'm going to pick Pepe to pull this off, probably by submission at some point. Now, kicking off the main card, we have Jessica Andrade, who is 11-3, taking on Larissa Pacheco, who is 10-0. Now, Nick, what's the MMA odds maker's perspective on this one?
I opened Andrade minus 140 to come back on Pacheco, even money. A little bit surprised at the movement early on. I figured the line would probably get bet up for Andrade, and it did not. Pacheco is now minus 135 to come back on Andrade minus 105, so slight favor for Pacheco. And I do understand it. I mean, especially considering that Pacheco has a win over Aldana, and Aldana just had a very impressive performance over Peggy Morgan and Invicta. That's a very solid win over Pacheco, because not only did she stop Aldana, she actually was beating her up to that point, I think, pretty clear. I mean, it was a back and forth war. If you guys haven't checked it out, check it out. It's on YouTube. But Pacheco did very well in that fight and ended up finishing a very talented opponent. Now, that being said, the rest of her resume is not that great. I mean, Pacheco's fought not the greatest competition level, and Andrade has definitely faced the better competition throughout her career. And I think Andrade at this point actually is the better overall fighter. It all depends on what type of game plan and what type of fight Andrade makes this. Andrade is going to be a lot shorter. I mean, so Pacheco is going to have a significant reach advantage in this fight. But Andrade is going to have a little bit of speed to go along with it. She's going to have the ground advantage, the wrestling advantage. I'm expecting Pacheco here to basically sprawl and brawl a little bit. And on the feet, Pacheco, she mixes in some kicks once in a while, but it's her hands that are very impressive. I mean, the girl throws a lot of leather with her hands, and she's very accurate with her punches and has some power. I mean, you don't see a lot of power in the women's division typically, knockout power that is, but Pacheco definitely has knockout power. And if there's any flaws in Andrade's game, is as the fight goes on, she tends to slow down a little bit, and she is very hittable. If that's the case here against Pacheco, if she doesn't get finish Pacheco early on, and the fight does progress and get into later rounds, I think Pacheco is going to be kind of unloading on Andrade a little bit as the fight goes, and it's very possible that she does finish Andrade off. If not, maybe she steals round 2 or 3 against Andrade too. But I think Andrade's game plan should be to feel her out on the feet a little bit, see how the striking goes, and she's going to get outpointed probably and clipped on the feet, so she's going to look to take the fight to the floor. Now, Andrade has a little bit underrated wrestling and ground attack, so I think she might be able to do that. And if she does, that's her path to victory. But again, as she slows down, I think Pacheco's going to get her spots. This is a tough fight for me to pick back and forth, because I think Andrade is just slightly ahead of Pacheco right now overall skill-wise, but I see the upside in Pacheco, and I think that we're probably going to see the best version of Pacheco that we've seen, even above what we saw on footage. She was impressive there, but I know making her UFC debut, even if it is a little bit on short notice, she's going to be ready, she's going to be motivated, and she's going to be good. So I'm going to slightly pick Pacheco to win this fight. I think, again, this is a fight I've been going back and forth on, but I do believe that Pacheco will do more damage on the feet, and that's probably going to win her the fight.
And I'm going to slightly disagree. While I do think that Pacheco is a very talented striker and she does have an underrated ground game, some of that stuff is going to get her in trouble in this fight. Andrade is a very high volume striker. I mean, some of the most volume of any fighter in the women's bantamweight division. You know, she's playing like 7 strikes a minute, really high pace. And that aggression, while it could also play into Pacheco's power on the feet, it could also help her put Pacheco on the defensive, and I can definitely see Andrade working the ground game. You know, it worked in her last fight against Raquel Pennington. She didn't really want to go to the ground against Liz Carmouche or against Rosie Sexton, but she clearly does have some pretty solid top control when she does face someone who she has a better ground game than. And her submission, she has a pretty solid guillotine. I can definitely see Andrade getting this fight up close and personal, trying to get inside Pacheco's reach advantage and trying to get this fight to the ground. Pacheco will have a bit of a size advantage. Andrade has fought at flyweight before, so that is a bit of a concern. But I think Andrade is on a bit of a roll here. And if this fight goes to the ground, the thing that concerns me the most is that Pacheco, she's too aggressive on the ground, a little reckless, kind of like Tony Ferguson was in his last fight, and where he was just diving for submissions against Danny Castillo when he didn't need to, and he was giving up top position. I could definitely see that happening with Pacheco, where she rolls for knee bars or heel hooks or all kinds of things, and gives up position to Andrade, who is probably the better grappler. And I can definitely see Andrade taking top position and riding this one out. And on the feet, I think she'll hold her own. I am a little concerned about Pacheco's reach and power, but Andrade has proved that she's a pretty competent striker. You know, she outworked Raquel Pennington, who's a pretty good striker in her own right. So while I am a little concerned about Pacheco's power, I do think Andrade, her well-roundedness, will help her win this fight. So my pick's going to be Andrade. Now, sticking with the bantamweight division, but moving over to the men's portion, we have Yuri Alcantara, who is 30-5 with 1 no contest, taking on Russell Doan, who is 14-3. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how's the public shifted things so far?
I opened Alcantara minus 230, the comeback on Doan, plus 170. Line bounced up and down a little bit. It climbed all the way up to 300. Now it's back down to minus 260 for Alcantara. The comeback is plus 180 on Doan. Interesting fight. I mean, you have two guys with a lot of upside, a lot of hype, a lot of abilities, matched up with each other. Of course, Alcantara, being in his, home country, should have some advantages, hometown, home crowd kind of support. So Doan is going to be the one hitting the road for this fight. Skill set for skill set, both these guys are really good. I mean, they're well-rounded fighters. They both have some skill on the feet. They both have submission skill. They both have capable wrestling to go along with it. So this should be a good fight. Alcantara, I think, though, does have some advantages over Doan in most cases. I think he's just a little bit of a better finisher, if that makes any sense at all. He's got that killer instinct. I mean, he's actually, his last fight, that was more than impressive how fast he got that KO win, Alcantara. But Doan's looked pretty good overall as well. I mean, I think in his last fight against Brimage, that was a very questionable decision that could have went either way, but Brimage is pretty solid and legit. So it was a solid win, on his resume, and now he gets another chance to put another notch on his resume with Alcantara. If he comes to Brazil and ends up defeating a fighter like that, I mean, that's instantly going to rank him pretty decent. Alcantara, I believe, is definitely a top 10 type of fighter for 135. And so he's fighting a ranked opponent. This is an interesting matchup. It's more of a lose-lose situation, I think, for Alcantara, because Doan is good enough, I think, to present some problems to Alcantara. And if he loses to him, obviously he's going to suffer from that. But if he wins it, he's not going to get a lot of respect either from that. So it's a tough fight for Alcantara. But I do see the advantages. I think on the feet, again, Alcantara has a little bit more advantage. I think even in the wrestling department, Alcantara has been put on his back against good grapplers, and that seems to be his kryptonite. And Doan, no doubt about it. I mean, he's definitely capable in the wrestling department and capable in the ground game, but I still think Alcantara has the edge there. And I think he, again, is a more explosive, more powerful fighter on the feet as well, and more dangerous. So I think regardless where this fight takes place, I have to lean slightly towards Alcantara.
And I'm in agreement. Alcantara is definitely the right side to be on, although the age factor is a little scary. He's going to be significantly older than Doan. But in terms of pure MMA skill, Alcantara should have the advantage just about everywhere. The only thing I really see Doan having an advantage in, he's going to be like 1 inch taller, and he's probably going to have a slight reach advantage. But for Alcantara, he's going to be significantly more powerful on the feet. His ground game is much more dangerous. Doan is definitely more of the type of guy that uses his length a little bit on the feet. He's not that dangerous in terms of pure stand-up. He's more dangerous when he gets on top position and starts dropping some ground and pound. He has some really good ground and pound. But if they get in a scramble on the ground, I see Alcantara getting the better of it. In terms of finishing ability, you have to go with Alcantara. He's very dangerous on the feet. As you've seen, he blitzed Uriah Faber, and then in his last fight, he absolutely destroyed his opponent in the first minute or so. So he's looked really good when he's in control. His problem has been, in fights that go to decision, he can get outworked, he does lose a little steam, and his cardio is not the best. So honestly, the plan for Russell Doan here is to get this fight to the third round, maybe tire Alcantara out, maybe even potentially win a decision if Alcantara loses a lot of steam after the first round. That's pretty much everything that this fight boils down to. So I really don't like Doan's chances. He should have lost that last fight to Marcus Brimage, in my opinion, and I think that Alcantara is probably going to outwork him on the feet, potentially knock him out, and if they go to the ground, I think Alcantara is going to threaten with submissions or potentially knock him out on the ground with ground and pound. So I don't think Alcantara lets this fight go to decision where his flaws can be exploited. So my pick is going to be Yuri Alcantara. Now, moving up to the welterweight division, we have Santiago Ponzinibbio, who is 19-2, taking on Wendell Oliveira, who is 24-7. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how's the public shifted things so far?
I opened Ponzinibbio minus 165, the comeback on Oliveira plus 125. This is a spot that I am surprised at the movement. Oliveira is now the favorite at minus 135. The comeback on Ponzinibbio is minus 105. I'm surprised because, I mean, I know there's a lot of hype and buzz around Oliveira. He's labeled the War Machine in Brazil. And he's training now with Blackout, so he's training at a good camp. And the guy, throughout his career, you could tell what kind of potential he has. I mean, I'll start off with Oliveira's background. He's more of a striker. He's athletic, he's fast, he's powerful. He's listed as an orthodox fighter, but he kind of switches things up depending on his opponents too. So, he switches stances to adapt, which is also a good thing. He seems to pace himself well, so cardio in most cases is not really an issue. But the problem also with pacing yourself is that means sometimes you tend to let your opponent dictate the pace of the fight, and I think that that's what kind of gives Oliveira some problems at times. I mean, he's very explosive, and he's more than capable of finishing a fight standing up and striking. He also has actually some solid wrestling and takedowns and decent takedown defense, but he doesn't tend to use his wrestling. He likes to keep things standing more so than not and bang a little bit. And Ponzinibbio is going to more than likely oblige him in that area. I think Ponzinibbio is more than capable of striking with most, I think, at the 170 division. That's what he prefers to do as well. He's pretty well-rounded. In fact, I think he's actually a little bit more well-rounded than Oliveira at this point of his career. Ponzinibbio, to me, he's been pretty impressive. I mean, his time on The Ultimate Fighter, he was impressive on The Ultimate Fighter. I know he had that very hard fight battle with LaFleur, that he was respectable in. I mean, LaFleur stylistically was just a better matchup or bad matchup, I should say, for Ponzinibbio, but this is a different type of fight. And I think the advantages are going to really lie in Ponzinibbio here. I think that, again, Oliveira, I'm actually expecting to see a better Oliveira than I've seen on footage. I think that, his time with Blackhouse, and I'm expecting to see an excelled kind of fighter and a more confident and more capable fighter, but I still think Ponzinibbio is going to be a little bit too much. If Oliveira lets Ponzinibbio dictate the pace, then he's going to lose by decision. And I also think that Ponzinibbio is more than a capable finisher. I mean, the guy has 16 finishes on his record, and only, I think, 3 of his fights have went to the card. So that sometimes is not a good idea either. So I think this is Ponzinibbio's fight to win or lose, and right now he's sitting at a dog at -105, so there could very well be some value here. But of course, there's a lot of unknown factors in Oliveira. I think, again, he's a very talented fighter. There's a lot of hype and buzz around him, and I'm expecting to see a better version of Oliveira. So this should be at least a fun fight. One of these guys might very well get the finish, but I still got to lean towards Ponzinibbio because what I've seen from him has been a little bit more solid and a little bit more steady than Oliveira. So I got to pick Ponzinibbio to win this fight.
I'm in agreement for this one. I really think that Ponzinibbio is just the overall more well-rounded fighter. Oliveira, in terms of pure technique on the feet, he is the more dangerous fighter. He is a very good counter striker. He controls distance well. The problem with him is being a counter striker, you kind of let your opponent dictate the pace. And for counter strikers to win a fight, they need to up their aggression a little bit. And when they do land their counter strikes, they need to make them count. They usually need to either rock their opponent to win rounds and get a decision, or they need to get a finish with strikes, not get a knockout or something, or knock their opponent down and get a submission. And I'm not quite sure that Oliveira will be able to pull that off against Ponzinibbio because Ponzinibbio has so much heart. This guy is very strong. Has a lot of aggression, and he's really scrappy on the feet. If you watched his UFC debut against Ryan LaFleur, he was getting taken down, he was getting worked over, and he never gave up. He almost finished the fight with him in the final minute after a stand-up, and he got to his feet and rocked LaFleur, but couldn't quite get the finish. You can never count Ponzinibbio out. The guy was able to advance to the finals of the Ultimate Fighter Brazil Season 2, but broke his hand and ended up not being able to compete for the title of the show. And he's just a really solid fighter. He has a lot of power on the feet. I think his ground game is decent. He doesn't have the best wrestling, but his top control against other maybe Brazilian level grapplers in terms of wrestling is probably pretty good. So I think in terms of overall well-roundedness, Ponzinibbio is the better fighter than Wendell Oliveira, although Wendell has a little bit more experience. He's a little bit older. And Oliveira is the better counter striker. I'm not quite convinced that Oliveira is going to be able to get that finish. So I see Ponzinibbio dictating the pace, winning rounds, winning over the fans because they're definitely going to be in his corner for this fight. And I see Ponzinibbio probably winning a decision here. So my pick is going to be Ponzinibbio. Now, dropping down to the lightweight division, we have Leonardo Santos, who was the winner of the Ultimate Fighter Brazil Season 2, taking on Efrain Escudero, who was a former Ultimate Fighter winner, who is returning to the UFC. So Santos comes in with a 12-4-1 mark, while Escudero is 19-5. Now, Nick, what's the MMA odds maker's perspective on this one?
Well, I opened Santos minus 150, Escudero plus 110. Another tricky matchup. I mean, Santos obviously has the ground advantage in his spot. I mean, his Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is off the hook. He's going to have some length and reach advantages in this fight as well. His stand-up game continues to improve. And Escudero, of course, outside of the UFC, overall, he was very successful. That's why the UFC kind of let him back in here. And you know what? Escudero is definitely worthy of being in the 155 division. More so, I guess, as a gatekeeper than anything else. I don't expect him to make a serious title run, but you never know. I mean, if the guy keeps on improving his overall game, he's definitely has some ability. This is tough because Santos's cardio is what bothers me the most. I mean, I've been really more than respecting Santos in the past. I mean, I've put money on the guy before. I thought he would actually give Park a better fight than he did. I mean, I know the fight ended in draw, but there was some controversy there as well. I believe he probably should have lost that fight, in most cases, but it's Santos's cardio that is a question here. I mean, he's getting a little bit better on the feet, so he's starting to throw a little bit more accurate with a little bit more power, but make no mistake, it's his ground game and it's his ability to submit people and just control the pace on the ground that makes him special. Now, Escudero overall has pretty solid takedown defense. I know against good grapplers that seems to be his kryptonite, though. He has been put on his back in the past, controlled, submitted. So that's probably not a good sign for Escudero. But the problem is, I think after round one, I mean, whether you want to believe in Santos or not, he's going to be a slower fighter. He's going to slow down after the first round. So in round 2 and round 3, if Escudero does not get finished early on, which I expect him not to, I think in round 2 and round 3, Escudero could probably steal those rounds. I think Escudero overall on the feet is sometimes he's a little bit too tentative, which makes you frustrating and mad a little bit at times, but I think he could be more than capable of outpointing Santos on the feet, especially as the fight progresses a little bit. The striking battle is going to be close, even though I do give the slight lean to Escudero on the feet. Santos, again, has improved enough to make it interesting, and he's going to have 4 inches of actual reach, but it's all going to be if Escudero can actually stuff some of those takedowns and start turning the pace of the fight around after, the early portion of the fight. And I think it's a possibility that he can do that. It's another fight that I've kind of been bouncing back and forth on, but I'm going to go out and pick the dog here. I think Escudero is going to be successful in his return. I know it's kind of a tough fight. They're sending him to Brazil, and I mean, Santos is going to be in, again, his hometown, home environment, I should say, at least. In Brazil, his home country, so he's going to be motivated. He's going to want to get the W here. Escudero, though, should be motivated enough making his return to the UFC. And I think this is a very winnable fight for Escudero. I mean, stylistically, they match up pretty good, and I think, again, he could probably steal 2 out of 3 rounds. It's going to be close. If he hits the scorecards, it's going to be really a head-scratcher. We're not going to be sure how the judges really scored. I think it's going to be one of those fights that we're going to be expecting almost a split decision type of fight. So I do think that Escudero could probably be successful in doing that, so I'm going to slightly lean towards him. Now, again, our final selections will be made on the MMAOddsBreaker staff pick section, so make sure when that post is put on MMAOddsBreaker.com, you guys check it out, because there could be some changes in picks according to the weigh-ins or whatnot, or as we get closer to fight time. But for right now, I am going to lean towards Escudero.
And I'm going to have to disagree on this one, mainly because I really do think that Santos has made some great strides in his development recently, working with Nova União. You saw that in his last fight against Norman Park. He actually looked pretty competent on the feet against a pretty solid striker, and that fight ended up going to a draw. Santos on the ground is very dangerous with submissions. You saw that in his fight to win the Ultimate Fighter 2, where, he outlasted his opponent and then ended up taking the fight to the ground and getting a submission. Against Escudero, Escudero has just been so inconsistent throughout his career. He looked to be on the rise, this guy that, you couldn't miss as a prospect, and then he had a lot of issues making weight. He's had issues with defending submissions, and then of course he's had problems against really good grapplers and just getting outworked. Sometimes his head just is not there. Against Santos, I think, especially in Brazil, Santos is going to be incredibly motivated. He's going to have the crowd behind him. So if it's a close fight, I definitely see the judges being swayed by the crowd reaction. And in terms of pure stand-up ability, I think it's going to be relatively even, although Escudero probably will be able to hold his own better in the later rounds as Santos starts to fade a little bit. Wrestling, you got to go to Escudero, but in terms of submission ability, you got to go to Santos. So there's a lot of things that even each other out here. I think Santos is going to be the longer, taller fighter, so Escudero will have a little bit of trouble dealing with that. And overall, I think it's going to be an incredibly even fight. This is one of the toughest fights to predict on the entire card, in my opinion, in terms of how well matched they are. But I do think that the opponent shift, the late opponent shift, is going to be against Escudero's favor. And then the fight being in Brazil, I have to lean towards Santos pulling this one out with a gritty decision. So my pick is going to be Leonardo Santos. Now, sticking with the lightweight division and moving on to the co-main event of the evening, we have Gleison Tibau, who is 38-10, taking on Piotr Hallman, who is 15-2. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how's the public shifted things so far?
Up in Tibau, minus 190. The comeback on Hallman, plus 150. Line is staying steady right now, so 5 dimes getting two-way action on this fight. It's an interesting fight. I mean, Tibau even being that low of a favorite in a way is a tad bit surprising because, I mean, he's fought the who's who in the UFC lightweight division. The guy's been around for a long time, and he's quality. I mean, the guy's definitely at the top of the food chain for sure in the lightweight division. He's got solid wrestling. His stand-up always continues to improve. He dictates and controls the pace in most cases. The only question is, again, he's almost in one of those spots we were talking about Thiago earlier on in this podcast, and we were talking about he's probably older beyond his years. Tibau, I believe, is 31 years old, and he's probably MMA years. He's a little bit older now, so I think there might be some sign of a decline a little bit in Tibau. He does tend to slow down. His cardio sometimes is suspect. And if that's the case, he could leave some opportunities for Hallman here. Again, Tibau has almost every advantage across the board in this fight, I think, except Hallman, I think, is a more versatile striker. He could throw different things at you. He's going to be a little bit more effective on the feet. Again, Tibau pushes a good pace. His striking's definitely improved a lot, and he could do some damage on the feet. But I think Hallman, his key to win this fight is actually keeping Tibau at range a little bit and using his striking and landing. He has enough power where I think he can do some damage against Tibau too if he's able to keep it upright and he does follow his game plan. So this is, I think it's a dog or pass situation the way the line is right now. It's hard to lay a juice on Tibau even at this price, even though I said that it's surprising to see it this low. You got to look at it for now and not in the past. And I think now Hallman continues to get better. He's training at a good camp in Arizona, of course, and most of us know that. And he continues to improve. His cardio's gotten a little bit better. And his first few fights in the UFC, you could tell he was slowing down as the fight went on, but his cardio issues seem to be getting a little bit better. Hallman I'm talking about now. So I think he's probably catching Tibau at a good time. Now, it is in Brazil. Tibau is going to have the home crowd behind him, and he's going to be hyped and motivated for that. But I think if this fight hits the scorecards, we could possibly see Hallman stealing rounds 2 and 3. Or Tibau wins the first 2 rounds, maybe wins all 3 rounds, but it will be definitely competitive 3 rounds, either way you cut it here. So I'm going to slightly pick Tibau.
I'm going to agree with you, Nick. The main thing here is the experience of Tibau and the wrestling, because Hallman is okay on the feet, but he's really not anything that special, and that's really where Tibau has lost most of his fights in his career. It's been guys that he can't take to the ground that are better strikers than him. You saw it against Michael Johnson, Jim Miller, a whole bunch of different people throughout his career, because he's kind of kept that gatekeeper role in the UFC lightweight division. He's a huge lightweight, Tibau is. He cuts about the most weight of anybody in the lightweight division, and he uses it well. He gets top position against people. He has explosive takedowns, and he stays on top of you. He's very heavy. It's very difficult to get him off of you. And Hallman, he's kind of a guy that he's a survivor. He comes in, a lot of the time he'll lose the first round, and then he comes back, and once his opponent starts to fade, like against Francisco Trinaldo, against Eve Edwards, he completely takes over. Even though Hallman doesn't have the greatest conditioning, he's clearly been working on it. It got a lot better since he worked out at the MMA lab heading into his last fight, and I think he's staying there for this one, so we're going to see a pretty solid Piotr Hallman. I'm just not quite sure what his path to victory here is unless he can completely take advantage of Tibau as he slows down, because Tibau does slow down in fights. He doesn't have the greatest cardio. He usually does lose the 3rd round after he comes out strong. But I'm just not quite sure that Hallman has the ability to finish Tibau once Tibau does slow down, because he's just not that great of a striker. Hallman probably needs to take this fight to the ground, and Tibau's takedown defense is insane. So if he can stop Nurmagomedov's takedowns, he can absolutely stop Hallman's takedowns. So it's going to be a very difficult fight for Hallman, no matter how tired Tibau gets. I can definitely see Tibau pushing forward and just outworking him a little bit on the feet, and I can also see Tibau taking him down and holding him down. I'm not sure how much damage Tibau will do, but he should be able to be the superior ground fighter here, especially from top position. So I'm going to go with Gleison Tibau. I just think that he is the superior fighter here, and he should be able to hold his own in the grappling department enough to at least win a decision, and that's probably how the fight's going to go. So my pick is Gleison Tibau. Now, Reed, what do the numbers tell us for this one?
Well, you mentioned Tibau's takedown defense, and he actually is tied for 4th all time in the UFC. And this isn't a small sample size. We've got so many fights in this guy's career. We have 244 minutes of octagon time in the UFC for Gleison Tibau. That is a large amount of data, and he has been defending takedowns at 92% takedown defense. So 4th all time. That's only behind Renan Barão, John Jones, and Tyron Woodley. So he's in very good company. So we mentioned his fight with Nurmagomedov. He can stuff takedowns. So if Hallman is thinking that he's going to come in and take this down and go for submissions, think again, because Tibau will be the one who probably decides when this goes to the ground and if it stays standing. Now on the feet, a little bit less sample size for Hallman, admittedly, but so far their stats are actually very, very similar. The biggest differential probably is, Hallman has kept a higher pace, although again, sample size there. Tibau actually has very good, strike avoidance, although you mentioned his chin. He's now been dropped 3 times. He is now north of 30 and with a lot of fight experience, although punch for punch, his knockdown rate isn't that bad. Hallman's technically is worse, just because he did get dropped early in one of his fights against Trinaldo. So it's a little bit more even, a little bit more back and forth on the feet. So it's hard to tell who's going to win those exchanges when Tibau is maybe a little bit more efficient, but Hallman is a little bit higher paced. And also the younger guy, maybe he'll stay fresher. Very hard to know what's going to happen standing up. But in terms of grappling, I do think Tibau has the advantages here. So there's a slight edge that goes towards him. You know, if he's able to defend well and also choose when to go to the ground and maybe, you know, put the exclamation point on a couple rounds by landing a late takedown, which is frequently done by guys, that could be how he wins some rounds. But you're right. One guy knocking out the other. There's not a lot of support. You know, neither one of these guys has a big knockdown rate offensively anyway, but they do kind of have, you know, average to below average chins. So lack of offense, but maybe worse defense there. So there's a lot in the mix. So maybe this is a little bit closer on paper. You know, you wouldn't want to see the line go too far, but definitely a little edge to Tibau.
All right. Excellent. Thanks, Reed. Now moving on to the main event of the evening, we have Antonio Bigfoot Silva, who is 18-5 with 1 no contest, taking on former UFC heavyweight champion Andre Arlovski, who is 22-10 with 1 no contest. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
I opened Silva minus 260, the comeback on Arlovski plus 180. And if you're looking at the line now, it's skyrocketed. This has had definitely the most movement on the whole card, but it's also been out for a while now. Silva's minus 450, the comeback on Arlovski's plus 360. Now, obviously these guys have fought before in the past, and Silva has a win over him, and it was a solid win. I mean, there's no doubt that Silva won that fight against Arlovski years ago. Since that time, Silva's actually elevated his game, I should say, overall, to the point where he's made it to the top of the UFC heavyweight division. I mean, he's definitely a player, and he's got a couple title shots, of course, as we know as well. And Arlovski was getting knocked out, it seemed, by everybody for a while until he got back on a roll here recently and started making, again, some progress in his overall game. So both of these guys, since their first fight, really headed in 2 different directions. And I think Silva's probably the best he's ever been, to date right now. So Arlovski, I can understand, I guess, the action on Silva overall, because Silva should win this fight. Arlovski, really his main chance and hope to win this fight is landing that knockout punch. But the problem here is he can probably do that. I doubt it does happen, but he's got enough power for sure left in the tank that he could clip Silva. I mean, Silva, if there's been one questionable thing about Silva, it's been that chin. I know he was able to survive and been in some really good wars recently, which have been surprising. I figured that Hunt would land and catch his chin. He was able to survive that, and Hunt hits like a truck. So I think he should be able to survive here against Arlovski more times than not, and he should be able to dictate and control the pace of the fight, outscore Arlovski. He should be able to possibly even knock Arlovski out. We're talking about 2 suspect chins overall. I mean, Arlovski's been knocked out, I believe, 7 times throughout his career, and Silva 4. So in a heavyweight fight, there's no doubt that either one of these guys can catch each other's chin along the way and knock each other out because they both have offensive power enough to do so. But that being said, I do think that Silva, again, can dictate and control this fight. He can outpoint Arlovski on the feet. I think he can clinch up and control him against the cage. I think he can get the takedowns if needed to win this fight as well. So I really think it's going to be a very difficult fight for Arlovski to win. He's going to have to land that knockout punch in order to win this fight. And I don't see it happening as much as I see Silva controlling or getting the knockout or winning this fight. Silva has way more ways to win the fight, and I think he's probably going to get the job done. Now, laying 450, a good idea? No way. There's no possible, even though I think I'm pretty confident in Silva winning this fight, there's better fights to bet. Maybe on this card and down the road as well, that you guys do not have to go crazy and put your money on Silva because, I mean, that's when all of us, I think, are asking for laying that kind of juice on a fight like this. We're asking for a bad beat. So for me, it's actually a pass type of situation, or, I mean, Arlovski could actually present some value here if the line keeps on escalating. But as far as a pure pick goes, I do believe Silva's going to win, and I'm pretty confident in that.
And I agree. I was actually in attendance the last time these guys fought at Strikeforce Heavy Artillery, and, you know, Andrei Arlovski was definitely in better shape in his career at that point when they fought, and Silva still had his way with them. Since then, Arlovski has definitely slowed down. He's lost a lot of confidence in his striking. He really doesn't do a lot in the cage. He kind of pushes forward a little bit, occasionally throws strikes. It looks like he's a little worried about protecting his chin more than anything because he knows it's a liability. Antonio Silva, on the other hand, while he doesn't have a great chin, he still is extremely aggressive. He pushes forward. He looks for opportunities to finish the fight, to land those big bombs. And he's still a very dangerous fighter. He has a lot of confidence in himself. And I think that that's one of the biggest differences here. Both guys are about the same size, although Silva definitely weighs a lot more, like height-wise and reach-wise. It's pretty similar, but Silva definitely will have the advantage in the clinch, just like they did in the last fight. Every time that Arlovski seemed to try to get anything going on the feet, they would clinch, and then Silva would get the advantage. He'd take the inside position, and he'd just work him over a little bit with some soft, dirty boxing stuff. On the ground, I definitely see Silva having the advantage. He holds top position pretty well. He's a pretty solid Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu player, although he doesn't really use it much for submissions, more defensively than anything. And on the feet, both guys have a lot of power, but I think Silva has more power. Arlovski might be a little more explosive, might be a little quicker, but Silva, once he hits you, you are in big trouble. Those hands of his are massive. And his head, while he can get hurt, you know, you can hurt yourself punching his head. A lot of guys have broken hands on his skull. So this is a guy that's very tough, very, very determined. I mean, no one really saw the Mark Hunt Bigfoot fight go in 5 rounds the last time, and that was just an absolute war. So I really think that Silva's just going to be a little bit too much for Arlovski. Even though they fought, you know, Arlovski's fought a little bit more than Silva. He's taken a lot more damage. He's been knocked out way more times. And I really think that if this fight, at some point in this fight, Silva's going to catch Arlovski with something big, and Arlovski's going to go down. Because while neither guy has a great chin, I think Silva's is a little bit better. His recovery's a little bit better. And Arlovski can absolutely be finished. So I think that this headlining bout does not end well for Andrei Arlovski. So my pick's going to be Antonio Bigfoot Silva. Now, Reed, what do the numbers tell us for this one?
Well, it's a little bit weird because, first of all, Antonio Silva is not used to being the big favorite. He's been a big underdog before, and we've actually seen him come through against Fedor and against Alistair Overeem. And so now finally people are figuring out that this guy's actually pretty legit. You know, he has credentials, he has striking, he has judo, and he's got the black belt in jiu-jitsu, so he has a competent ground game. When he gets into just blasting wars, the problem with him is that his defense is terrible. He allows himself to get hit. Now he has an 82-inch reach, which should keep most opponents out of range. And the question here is whether or not Arlovski can get inside. Arlovski, punch for punch, has a better chin, Neither one of them, actually, I think both of them are below average in terms of the heavyweight benchmark. So they both tend to fall down a lot, and yet they also both tend to knock people down above average. In terms of accuracy, Arlovski is slightly more accurate with his power hand, but Antonio Silva has a 43% accuracy on his jab. So put that together with that 82-inch reach, and he's able to really pepper people. Unfortunately, he's also not really keeping up in terms of pace. So there's some back and forth in the striking stats, at least. And Arlovski's, at least his old school takedown defense, used to be pretty good. I would definitely give Silva an advantage on the ground. If he gets top control, he's just a big, heavy guy. He knows how to keep it. We've seen him beat people up from top control. So, that probably wouldn't work out well for Arlovski if he gets put on his back. But if this stays standing, and these heavyweights, they do tend to stay standing more so than other guys. The way the line is going, it's just getting a little too uncomfortable. There are certainly advantages for Silva, but there's also some advantages for Arlovski. And with that kind of juice, with heavyweights, it's usually best to steer clear because anything can happen, as we just saw 2 big upsets last week, with heavyweights. Granted, this should be a full-size cage, so maybe it won't happen quite as fast, but there's probably more value on the underdog, especially if this tends to go any further on the lines.
So that'll do it for our full event breakdown for UFC Fight Night 51. Part 2 of the Premium Oddscast featuring our premium bets will be out Friday night around 8 p.m. Eastern Time. So stay tuned for that if you're an MMAOddsBreaker.com premium member. If we have a free play to give out, make sure to follow @Premium Oddscast or @MMAOB_premium on Twitter because that's where we'll post them first. We can also notify you of our free bets via email if you prefer that method. Just send an email to picks@MMAOddsBreaker.com and we'll add you to our free bet mailing list. Also, feel free to like our Premium Oddscast Facebook page. We post articles, show announcements, and plenty of other information there so you can stay up to date on everything from us if you're interested. Special thanks to our sponsor, 5 Dimes. Good luck, everyone, and hopefully the betting gods are on your side this weekend.